find something that you obsess about, track that screenplay down. I think it's almost a mistake to try to read every screenplay ever written. And because some of those, that's fine to read a lot. But I think obsession is what the best writers, even if you step back, you'll see a common thread.
This episode is brought to you by Bulletproof Script Coverage, where screenwriters go to get their scripts read by top Hollywood professionals. Learn more at covermyscreenplay.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Scott Smith, man. Thank you for coming on the show, brother.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you, man. So before we get into your awesome titled book, Screenwriting with Brass Knuckles, which we're going to get into why you called it that, by the way. I'm going to ask you the question I always ask. How did you get started in this insane, ridiculous business that we love so much?
I grew up in a time when movies were special. It was before internet, before cable, before DVDs, before VHS. And for a lot of younger listeners, that's just hard to compute. But movies were really something that I would say the 70s are when I really started going to movies and that was a great era to be going to movies, and so when you went to movies, it was exciting. It was thrilling. You stood in line, and if you didn't get in line, you waited again to the next showing. And it was just an exciting time. And I think as someone who played a lot of sports, movie making was not on my radar in Orlando, Florida. It wasn't something that someone did. That was something that happened in Hollywood, maybe New York, but it was way off the radar. But there was one connection, and it was Burt Reynolds. Burt Reynolds was a football player who was a movie star. And I think somewhere deep down in me, it was like, could I do that? Could I be a part of that somehow? So I think Burt Reynolds was like step one. And step two was taking a class who I dedicated the book to with Anne Rifo. She was a creative writing teacher that I had in high school. And she said, this class is about being creative. And whatever hesitation I had in school of jumping into harder subjects, creative writing just sounded like fun. Like you can just make up stories. And then this was 1979, 1980. She said, we're going to make a video. And there was like an AV person that came in with a camera. And I think we did a video that was a spin off of A Christmas Carol. And then we did a few other videos. And I was just, as a high school senior, that's what you want. You want some teacher that's just going to open the door for you. So I kind of still had football on the back burner. I was a decent athlete in football and baseball. But I also had this thing about, hey, I think I want to get involved in film. And so eventually I went to a community college where I took every photography class I could. They didn't have any film classes. Worked as a intern with the Sanford Herald, where I'm writing stories, and then I transferred down to the University of Miami, where I was part of the film program there, and took that 8mm class where you produce, you direct, you shoot, you write, you edit. And I often say that class, everything I've done since then is, especially today, because there's a time when I was working with crews of 20 people. And then it contracted to where it's 2 or 3 people going out in a shoot. And then sometimes because of budgets, it's just you, doing all those things. So that first teacher, Anne Rifo, really kind of opened the door. And then University of Miami Film School. And then I went out to Los Angeles to finish out there. And it's just been exciting. It's been exciting to just ride all the changes. And I think one of the key things that I learned along the way was to embrace your limitations. And I think Robert Rodriguez says it, that, he often has filmmakers come to him and say, this would have been better, but this happened and this happened. And Rodriguez says, that's what filmmaking is. Things don't work. And he tells the story about one of his sets actually catching fire.
Yeah, from Dusk Till Dawn. Yeah, from Dusk Till Dawn. Yeah,
early on. And they had to look at it and say, well, we don't have time to rebuild it. It kind of looks cool. Let's keep going. And I think that's the lesson for all of us is you got to just keep going, embrace the limitations. You know, it was film when I started out. It was 8mm film. It was 16mm film. When I graduated from school, I ended up working as a 16mm. We had an Eclair NPR.
Mm-hmm.
We had a flatbed, Steenbeck flatbed editor.
Stop talking dirty, sir. Stop talking dirty. Stop it.
And my first shoot at 25, they said, "Oh, and you're flying to Aspen next week to shoot America's Downhill." And I thought, man, my dream of doing a feature film by 30, you know, I'm set.
I'm good.
And you know, it's like when I start the first chapter of the book about conflict, it's like you find out pretty early on that there's conflict in your life. There's conflict in movies. That's one of the things that keep them from not being boring. And Richard Walter, who used to be at UCLA, he always said the number one screenwriting rule is don't be boring.
Right.
And I just think all along it's been, you know, intention and obstacles. That's one of the things that Sorkin says is all of his films and TV shows are about intention and obstacles. And I think for every filmmaker out there, no matter what level you are, you have an intention to do this, and there's going to be an obstacle in your way. And those of us that persist just keep saying, okay, well, this is the obstacle today. When I was setting up for this interview, I decided, hey, you know what? I think I might throw up a 150 in the background, a little airy 150. And I put that thing in, and what happens? The bulb pops. And I'm like, man, I haven't used this lamp in a while. I wasn't even sure how to open the lamp up. So I'm going to YouTube, getting that. And I have to say, where do I keep my 150 bulbs? You know, and I just laugh. And I just, we're in a pandemic right now. It's just, you have to realize at some point, oh, this is the way it is. There is no, once I get over that hump. I think when I was younger, I thought, once I get over this hill, once I get past this.
Yeah. That whole concept of the whole, like, if I just can get here, or if this thing just happens, then everything will be fine. Or if I could just get that one meeting, the money's going to drop for my feature. Like all these things. On a side note, real quickly, I have to tell you my Burt Reynolds story. In Florida, have you ever happened to go to the Burt Reynolds Museum?
Is that in Jupiter?
It is in Jupiter.
Okay.
It is in Jupiter. I was invited to speak to a film organization, and they told me, we're meeting at the Burt Reynolds Museum. I'm like, I'm sorry, the what? They're like, the Burt Reynolds Museum. I'm like, okay, sure. And I drove up in Jupiter, and I went in, and lo and behold, it's an entire museum dedicated to all Burt Reynolds memorabilia, his entire career from football all the way. And it was just a very odd, it's a standalone building on top of it. And it's just a very odd place. And he was alive at the time. It was just a weird place, but it was like one of those stories. You're like, that's just the weirdest place I've ever spoken in my entire life. Like you're surrounded by pictures and magazine covers and posters of Burt Reynolds and memorabilia. It was a weird experience.
For some reason, the Johnny Cash Hurt video comes to mind, where, you know, you have all this, you know, I mean, at one time, Johnny Cash in the 50s coming up with Elvis, you know, was close to the center of the world. And then that video is just, I still think it's one of the greatest music videos ever made.
Oh, Hurt? Yeah.
Yeah, Hurt.
Oh, and the song is amazing. I love that song.
Yeah. And
I'm a huge Johnny Cash fan in general. I love Johnny Cash. But anyway, we're not here to talk about that stuff. Let's get into what we're here to talk about. So you wrote a book called Screenwriting with Brass Knuckles. Why did you entitle the book Screenwriting with Brass Knuckles? Because I've had a lot of authors on the show that have screenwriting books. That's probably one of the best titles.
Good.
Good branding, good marketing. It catches the eye. I like it. So why did you call it that?
Well, good. At least it has a good title. That's the.
I mean, inside is crap. I've read the book, but no, I'm joking. So why did you call it that? What? How did you come up with that awesome title?
You know, I'm not sure when it popped in my mind. I think you know, one of the takeaways from Stephen is he talks about always, you know, you're always looking for stories. You're almost like a paleontologist. You see this little white thing on the side of the road, and you pull over and you dust it off, and it turns out that it's a bone, and then you just kind of follow it where it's going to go. And so I'm not exactly sure where the exact title came up with, but I do know as a kid, I watched a lot of this is before WWE and WWF and all the glamorous Hulk Hogan and beyond after that. Back in the 70s when I was just a wee little boy, it was just fascinating, just like it is for a kid today. But it was much more limited. The storylines were much more limited.
Production value was much more limited.
Down. Yeah, they would pretty much have the body slams, the against the ropes type of stuff. Somebody would pull out a chair and hit somebody on the back. And then when somebody was really getting beat down, then Gordon Soley was the great announcer, and he'd say, well, it looks like he's almost done. And then he reaches in. He's like, what's that he has in his hands? Wait a minute. He's got brass knuckles. And all of a sudden, the guy that was getting beaten would start beating the guy that was beating him until he was like some kind of fake blood. But you're a kid, so you don't really know. And it was like, you just knew that brass knuckles had some kind of superpower. And there was something about the way that flows, brass knuckles. And then throughout time, it's from rappers today to, as I point out, Spike Lee at the 2019 Oscars, where he's got his throwback brass knuckles. The University of Miami football team's got their own. They call them brass rings because that's probably a little bit less violent, but they're brass knuckles.
Well, that's the thing. Like it's a violent imagery, but then I love like screenwriting. So I'm gonna because screenwriting in general is so difficult to do. It's one of the most difficult art forms in literature to do because it's so concise and you got every word actually means something, and it's really difficult to do. That I love the concept of the brass knuckles. Like, I'm gonna beat this script to a bloody pulp. You will not beat me, kind of thing. So that's why I love the name so much.
Well, it's funny how Blake Snyder's Save the Cat just became part of folklore, and it really didn't say screenwriting. It didn't say whatever. It had that cat hanging. I remember the first time I saw that in the bookstore, and fortunately I got to have a little bit of communication with Blake before he died, and he was just a nice guy, and so I think that clean cover of the cat. And something kind of like, what's that about? Something that was intriguing. So, and I definitely wanted to have screenwriting in. And again, there's only been like 200 screenwriting books written
this week.
This week,
because we are in a pandemic, so now there's a lot more screenwriting books out there.
Yeah, I will say that without the pandemic, this book would not have been finished because I've been at it a long time, and really the goal was to just curate a lot of. Those 200 books, I think I read 190 of them.
Sure.
And every book has one or two great thoughts in it. And basically my goal in starting my blog, Screenwriting from Iowa and Other Unlikely Places, when I started that in 2008, I thought, you know what, I'll just pull all my production notes together. Maybe this will be helpful for someone else. And I really thought it would be a year process. I didn't know that it would be a 12-year process. And one of the quotes that I've always loved, and unfortunately, I don't remember who said it, but he said, we tend to overestimate what we can do in 1 year and underestimate what we can do in 10.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a great quote.
And yeah, that's almost the theme of the book, is that, it's going to take a lot longer than you think it's going to take. And
so wait a minute, you mean to tell me that I'm not going to sell my first script for $1 million? Is that?
You may. It's one of the great stories. Before I started the blog, one of the things that really got me involved in blogging was I went to see Juno. Mm-hmm. So I saw it. There you go. I saw it in January of 2007, and I followed that story. Which I don't know how much of it was true, but I do know that she had grown up in Chicago, went to University of Iowa. I was living at that time in Cedar Falls, Iowa, which is, maybe an hour and a half from the campus at University of Iowa. And then she went up to work various jobs in Minneapolis, and she started blogging. And eventually a Hollywood agent said, "Hey, have you ever written? I like your writing. Have you ever written a screenplay?" And she says, "No." And she said that she was going to write about the '85 Chicago Bears.
That would have been awesome.
Yeah, it would have been awesome. And so she didn't write that. She writes Juno, and then Jason Reitman picks it up, and before you know it, she's collecting an Oscar.
But with that said, that is, like I always tell people, that is the lottery ticket. That is
exactly
the outlier. Exactly. Like it's the top of the pyramid.
It is the top of the pyramid, and that's, when we get interested in anything. If it's sports, we want to be Michael Jordan. We want to be LeBron. We want to be Kobe. If it's football, we want to be Tom Brady. We want to be Jerry Rice. We want to. We look at these, in film, it's Spielberg and Tarantino, and we look at that, and it's, we kind of need that to get out of the gate, and then you realize at some point, there's just not that many, whether it's Bach, Beethoven, whether it's
in any field,
yeah, Springsteen, it's Jay-Z. There's just not a lot at the top, and so we can learn from those people and aspire to be those people. As everyone points out, Tarantino once wasn't on the pyramid, and he just,
he wasn't even in the desert. He wasn't even in the desert. He was at a video store, geeking out and watching films like 4 or 5 times a day. That's a whole other conversation. Well, all right, so let's get into the meat of the conversation, sir. What does football and screenwriting have in common?
Well, I think it's, that it has Burt Reynolds.
Well, obviously, besides Burt Reynolds, this is specifically from your book, so I wanted to see. I'm giving you. I'm lobbing you up a softball.
Yes, that is fine. That is fine. I think my original first line was just so weak, and I sat there mulling it over. What's the opening line of the book going to be? And I remembered when I was a walk-on at the University of Miami. So I went to Miami because I had a film school, but I was also a decent football player, and so I was going to walk onto the football team. And so I dislocated my shoulder, and so my shoulder is popped out after a play. I can't get it back in, and I hear one of the coaches say, "Get that fucking walk-on off the field." And it was like, I don't know that I ever felt lower in my life. It just was fortunately there was a doctor there. He popped it back in, and I later had surgery, and then just like I walked on, I walked off, and I continued the film production path. But it was just that moment just stood out as just a life-changing point. It was the end of my football playing. I mean, I played organized football for 10 years. And that was the end of it. It needs some big conflict, some big moment where you go, okay, that was then, this is now. And we've all gone through that. And if you haven't, you will go through it, and you'll go through it multiple times in your life. And I think the best movies are just full of that. And I think a lot of people get caught up in story and plot and characters, and all of those things are important. But I wanted to start the book with the dramatics, bam. And so that's what they have in common, is that, football's a violent sport. And
there's conflict everywhere. And there's conflict everywhere.
There's every play. Yeah, every play. And, the stakes are high. And so, yeah, that was just, there aren't a lot of people that come from sports. I listened to Matthew McConaughey talking recently that when he was in film school, he was a frat boy, and he was the only frat guy
in the film department.
In the film department. And I was like that at Miami, and later when I went to Columbia College in Hollywood, there weren't a lot of jocks around, and I had never seen a Kurosawa film. There was things, I had all of the cockiness, even though I was probably, I dressed out for one JV football game at University of Miami. So I may have had the shortest college football career of any Miami Hurricane ever. If Jim Kelly and Michael Irving and Warren Sapp are at the top, I'm right there at the bottom. And it's just funny how that all works out.
So with conflict, how do you add conflict to your story? Because I mean, the signs of a bad movie is that there's not enough conflict. Among many signs, but that's one of the big ones.
Yeah, it is, I don't think there's a scene, and this will save you on film school if you haven't gone to film school, because again, as somebody who didn't grow up in the age of internet, there wasn't an indie film hustle. There wasn't Save the Cat. I think Sid Field's book was out. I don't know if you've ever gone back and read when it came out. I think I read it when I was there from 80 to 84. So I think it might have come out in 79 or 80, but I read it somewhere in there. And if you read it today, it's there's not a lot of meat there. It was revolutionary.
I remember when I read that, I was in college and I wasn't even in film school yet. I was like just out of high school, going to like my community college before I figured out I was going to go to film school. And I read that book and I was like, oh my God, all movies are the same. All the story, like, I mean, you mean, so like there's points in a story that like the tipping point, the point of no return, the whole hero's journey concept that he threw in there. And then the structure of a structure, it was mind blowing. You have to understand, for somebody who doesn't know anything, that book is revolutionary.
Yes.
But once you've been around a bit, you go back and go,
Yeah. Yeah. It is, what is great about, having a class where we had one class that we watched. And again, I did not watch, when a movie played, you might be able to catch it on TV, but right. I was outside playing sports. I grew up in a house without air conditioning in Florida. So I didn't want to be inside a lot. And, so we didn't, seeing an old movie was very rare, and there wasn't an appreciation for it. And so we watched A Place in the Sun, which is Montgomery Clift and Elizabeth Taylor and Shelley Winters. And the teacher showed us the film, and we watch it. And then he gives us a quiz, and it's not really a graded quiz, but he basically says, what music do you associate with Elizabeth Taylor? And then he starts talking about conflict. And he starts talking about layers of filmmaking that I didn't see any of it. And so I think that was like a whole awakening for me to realize. And one of the things that came out of that was how every scene has conflict. Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't, it's rising conflict. It's setting up that conflict is coming. And,
so every scene has to have a form of conflict or setting up future conflict that's coming up very soon.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so once you get baptized into that, and then you can't stop seeing it. It's like the floodgates have opened up, and you're watching a movie, and you're watching an actor who is trying to open a bottle of something, or he's trying to do this, or he's you go back and watch Chaplin, and you're like, wow, that's all conflict. You go back and watch Hitchcock, and it's like, that's all conflict, and you realize like, oh, that is just the missing ingredient in a lot of stories, that when someone gives me a screenplay to read, I'll say, well, nothing happened in the first 10 pages. Well, that's because I'm setting up the story. I was like, you don't really have time to set up the story. And even if that's what you're doing, there needs to be conflict within it. And so conflict is what gets our attention. And when we talk about great films, and, at least, this will resonate. You can just transcribe it into whatever films you like. But, I think of, the chainsaw scene in Scarface is just, when I saw that in the theater,
so good.
Again, I've still never seen Saw and those kind of movies. I mean, Scarface was a regular dramatic film. And so to witness that on screen, back in the day was just like, that's conflict. And the films that we tend to remember scenes, and the scenes that we tend to remember tend to be highly emotional and full of conflict. And, when you watch that film, somebody did a film about Rocky going up the steps, and how many people over the ages have done that trip. That's all about conflict. And, the first time when he gets up there and he's sucking wind and whatever. And it's like, it's amazing. It's amazing to see, somebody come all the way from Japan to go up those steps. And it's like, wait a minute, you're 23 years old, you're from Japan, and you're coming all the way to Philadelphia to go up these steps
from a movie that was made in 1975 or 76, I think it is.
75 or 6. Yeah. I mean, it's you know, a lot of the film references I make in the book are films like that, films that seem to stand the test of time. And it's films like Castaway and Jerry Maguire. They're films that resonate with me, but I find a lot of young people that I talk to today, it's a different way. They might be playing a video game and watching a movie. They're watching a little bit on their phone and they're doing something else. They're texting a friend. And so the movie experience is so different now. And but I do find that when I'll mention certain films, there's certain, and I don't call them tentpole movies, because I think if you know, if you're starting out screenwriting, you're not writing tentpoles, you know, and especially in a post-pandemic world, you know, look at those indie films, look at those films that are being made with, you know, either the DSLRs or even cell phones like Sean Baker did. You know, but those films, the one thing that they all have in common, the big tentpole movies, the superhero movies, the mainstream movies, the indie films, it's all conflict, and conflict all the way, and many different levels of conflict. You know,
because I was thinking when you were saying conflict, I was like, okay, because I remember a movie, obviously, a classic, Lethal Weapon. So Lethal Weapon, written by Shane Black, who is a legendary screenwriter. If whoever's listening has not read a Shane Black script, you need to go over to bulletproofscreenwriting.tv and download all of his screenplays, because I have them all there for you. Well, a lot of them for you to download and read and educate yourself on his way. But if you look at Lethal Weapon, obviously there's conflict the second Riggs and Murdoch meet. The entire movie is conflict. Same thing for 48 Hours, like the second they meet. That's easy. But the setup of the conflict is so well done, because even if you remember, and I've seen the movie dozens of times I haven't seen it in a while, but I've seen that movie so many times during my video store days that I know it fairly well. But setting up Riggs, he has an internal conflict, massive internal conflict.
It's the trailer, right?
He's in the trailer. Yeah, that scene, I could still see it. You're panning from the sunset. The dog is running on the beach. Then the dog goes in and wakes up Riggs, who walks off without any pants on, takes a piss, then drinks beer in the morning. As breakfast.
There's something Christmassy playing on the TV.
Oh yeah, it's all Christmas. Yeah. There's Christmas music playing in the background.
And there's a gun and there's a bottle. I mean,
yeah, and he's been drinking the night.
You're getting conflict if you stop it.
Yeah, and he's smoking, and there's just like and then even just setting up before you meets Riggs, Murdoch. There's conflict. Then you go over to Murdoch's side, which is basically the complete opposite of, like, he's alone, internal conflict, while Murdoch he's not alone. He's got a full-blown family, and his conflict is just like family conflict and conflict within himself. He's like, oh, I'm gonna retire in 10 days, which sounds so cliche now, but when he did it, it wasn't cliche. And then it was just so brilliantly done. And then when these two immovable objects clash, it is the brilliance of that script and how it's so beautiful. And it's just conflict. Every scene is dripping with conflict. Every scene.
Yeah, you kind of get an idea of Riggs from that big one. I think I'm confusing the Christmas scene with Die Hard there at that point. But there's there's music. There's Christmas music playing in. Oh, is there? Because the beginning scene is a woman jumping off the building to Jingle Bell Rock. So it's Shane Black. It's Shane Black. Shane Black shoots everything's at Christmas. Even Iron Man 3 was during Christmas time. Like that's his thing. He has to be you're just adding. Here's a couple things I have in my book where I just talk about. It's conflict. It's like E.T. misses his space ride. Juno discovers she's pregnant. Rocky loses his boxing gym locker. A barracuda kills Nemo's mother and siblings. And then all that great dialogue, just turning the page. Houston, we have a problem. I'm melting from The Wizard of Oz. We are at war from The King's Speech. I have this problem with my apartment from The Apartment. Yeah, I'm going to need you to come in on Saturday from Office Space. It's, I could have been somebody. I could have been a contender. I'm not ignoring you, Dan, from Fatal Attraction. run, Forrest, run. I mean, all those great lines that we all repeat over and over again, they're just packed with conflict. And
so conflict should be the driving engine, one of the driving engines of a good story.
Yeah, now, it's I'm just trying to get somebody's attention with Screenwriting with Brass Knuckles, and so the next logical step is conflict. I mean, later, everybody's got strengths and weaknesses. When you watch movies, obviously, if you watch Aaron Sorkin, that whole thing where David Mamet movie, which is one of the about.
Can you say that? What you dropped out for a second? You dropped out a second? Can you say that again with David Mamet?
Oh, so when David Mamet says, what you should be striving for is to write a silent movie, and that works when you look at something like A Quiet Place. I mean, it's almost a silent movie, but then that doesn't apply to Aaron Sorkin, and so that's one of the fun things I have with the book is I'm showing how different writers work in different ways. Some people start with theme. Some people find the theme somewhere in the middle of it. Some people even say, I don't care about theme, and other people say, well, that's for other people to, put onto my film. So I think when you're starting out, and especially when I was in school, I wanted just tell me the ABC steps. And what you realize over years of reading interviews and DVD commentaries and books, and, I went to AFI seminars and I went to UCLA Extension. I went to hear any writer talk about the process. And maybe one of the things that sets me apart is I look at that like just ingredients into the blender. And I'm trying to point out like, hey, you know what? So-and-so writes that way, but so-and-so doesn't write that way at all.
There's always an I don't mean to interrupt you, but there's always an exception. Like what works for Tarantino does not work for Sorkin. What works for Sorkin does not work for Shane Black and or Diablo Cody or any other. It's very individual, and there is no, and this is the only business I feel that in the world. I mean, not my only business, but one of the few that there is no recipe. There is,
there is and there isn't. That's what I basically boil down the 10 chapters. Like, this is what they have in common.
They all have that in common, but the point is that conflict is obviously a part of the recipe, but how you apply that part of the recipe is up to you. It's not like crack an egg and all eggs are the same. You can't crack conflict and all conflict's going to be the same. It's different for E.T. that it is for Forrest, that it is for Rocky. Like, it's completely different. So that's the very frustrating and exhilarating part of being a screenwriter and a storyteller is how you craft the recipe. Because if you're an educated screenwriter, you understand all the elements, all the key ingredients of telling a good story. You've studied, you read books, you watched movies, you inherently know all this. It's how you combine those all together, and that's what makes your voice special. I mean, Tarantino is the ultimate example of taking from everybody else, throwing it into a blender and filtering it through his point of view, which is so unique. There is you can't try, and people have tried to write like Tarantino. You can't write like Sorkin. It's hard to write like Shane Black. It's hard to write like all of these really accomplished masters because they figured it out that they're like, oh, it's my recipe. I don't have to follow everybody else's recipe. I could take from everybody else and I'm just going to filter it through my recipe, which is, I think, the key of good writing, good storytelling, a point of view.
Yeah. And it's, there's craft and there's talent and hard work. Mm-hmm. And talent and hard work you can't really teach. That's on you. And if there's when someone says, well, why should I read a book from you, instead of Aaron Sorkin or Tarantino? I said, well, as soon as Tarantino and Aaron Sorkin write a book, you should buy that.
Yeah, I took the Sorkin masterclass. It was fantastic. I liked it.
So there's no doubt that these guys are making lots of money writing screenplays. So to write a screenwriting book that's not going to have a big payoff, I got contacted because of my blog. The blog won a regional Emmy. And so I got contacted by somebody. They said, we would like you to ghostwrite a screenwriting book. and they were going to pay me X amount of money. And they the one caveat they had was you have 3 months. Now, mind you, it took me 12 years to write this. And I thought, you know what? If I've read a lot of screenwriting books by well-known produced screenwriters, and I think where they fall short is they have those one or two things that I glean from and put into my book and in a short quote form. But I think when you have 3 months to dissect not only what makes your writing special, but all the other writers out there, what I'm trying to do is curate all this kind of different things out there, show the contrast. I went to a workshop once with a writer who had won an Oscar, an Emmy, a Tony, and a Grammy.
And he got an EGOT. He got the EGOT.
Yes. And he said, you know, he had a play that was in town, and then he agreed to do this little master class on the side. And one of the first things he said was, I'm not sure that writing can be taught. And I'm not sure why they asked me to do this.
Good start.
I don't think there's any rules. And I raised my hand and I said, what about conflict? He goes, conflict is good. You need to have that. And we were off to the races. And he did not have a systematic way of talking about writing. But what he did have was some incredible stories about, you know, the process and what worked for him. He just didn't have it packaged in any kind of way that he could tell students. So sometimes I do think there's the old adage of those who can't do teach. And I think there's a little bit of those who can do sometimes can't teach. I think the script notes guys, you know, Craig Mazin and John August are two guys that are able to do it and articulate what they do. But there are other writers. Sometimes you're like, how did that guy ever write a screenplay? Because he's all over the place as far as giving a talk or whatever. So I'm trying to be that middle guy that's pulling throughout film history. I think it's also a book that I really make a concerted effort to to go back and find women, people of color, you know, just throughout film history, because they're all there, but they don't always get, you know,
a spotlight.
Equal time. Yeah, and there's a lot to learn. I mean, Frances Marion was somebody that I was not familiar with at all until a couple of years ago, but turns out she was not only the first woman to win a screenwriting award, she was the first screenwriter, period, to win 2 screenplay awards. You know, and this was, you know, back in 1929, 30, when screenplays were a little bit different. But her career is just fascinating and
interesting.
And so I give her a little bit of, and she had actually later in her life, she went back and wrote a screenwriting book or two, and it's amazing how it lines up with, you know, Aaron Sorkin's Masterclass or
right.
Gamut. I mean, they're all different, but I'm just trying to find that sweet spot where how is a romantic comedy, a gritty indie film, a silent movie, what do these all have in common? And so that's kind of what I'm tapping into. And again, if you go back to Shakespeare, you'll find plenty of conflict.
Right. Oh, yeah, of course. Now, can you discuss a little bit the difference between the great script and the right script?
Yeah, you know, that's Christopher Lockhart, a story editor over at WME. He's the blog allowed me to connect with a lot of people in Hollywood, even though I'm in Cedar Falls, Iowa at the time, and now in Orlando, Florida. It's been great to just today I connected with somebody that I hadn't connected with before. And I'm here I am talking to Indie Film Hustle, you know, Alex. And so it's, you know, if you'd have told me back when I was a 20-year-old film student that, this might take you 30, 40 years to
Yeah, I know.
I would just say enjoy the journey. I mean, there's been a lot of mountaintop experiences that production has afforded me. And I hope to be around a little bit more.
So what is the difference between the great script versus the right script?
Yeah, Christopher Lockhart would be the better one to unpack that. But basically, what he's saying is, you know, there's a movie that's screaming to be made, and I'll probably butcher his thinking, but he's really kind of talking about the good script. Really, is it a movie? That's one of his phrases I think he throws out a lot. And he's got a great Facebook group called the Inside Pitch, which is a lot of wisdom there.
Yes, he will be a guest soon on the show. Thank you very much.
We're good. He was those Hollywood guys that just calls it like he sees it, and but I really think I watched the movie last night, and I won't even go into what it was, but I almost turned it off after 5 minutes. The dialogue was bad. There was just, and this had major stars in it, and it's a fairly new release, and I was just like, this is so bad, and I kept just sticking with it, kind of nudging it forward a little bit and seeing where it was going to go till I got to the end. And I kind of think I thought, why did this film get made? And it was shot in an exotic location. I thought, okay, that's probably why everybody signed on. And maybe to a certain degree that was the right script, because it got made. It's just hard to get a film made, even harder now. But I think it's where those ingredients just all come together. It doesn't have to be. There's a lot of flaws in a movie like Juno. As much as I love Juno, you could chalk it up to being a first-time writer. I mean, everybody has that same sassy voice. It's like, does everybody have to be as sassy as Juno? But there was something about that was just the right time. I mean, even the topic was like, but for whatever reason, it was the right script at the right time that brought the right director, the right actors, that resonated with an audience. So somewhere a producer said, yeah, we think this is going to have an audience. I don't think that anyone thought it was going to be the blockbuster that it was and the Academy Award winning that it was. But I do think it's all those elements. I think Juno is a good film to really look at, especially for new writers, because it's a fairly simple story. I mean, it's there's not a lot of complexity to that.
Well, there's a lot of good. I mean, I've read screenplays that are, just amazing. Like from screenwriters, from sometimes known screenwriters, and you're just like, how has this not been produced? And I just saw Chicago 7, Aaron Sorkin's new movie that he directed and wrote, and it was amazing. It was so well done and so well put together. And he's like, I've been trying to get that movie done for a decade. He goes, but the timing was right because of what was going on politically in the U.S. right now.
Right.
And then they got greenlit, and then Netflix was around and they're like, how much do you need? Only 50 million? That's nothing. Here, take it. And that's what he was able to do. But you're right. All you could do as a screenwriter is just write the best script you can. If you try, if you try to target the market or try to corner the market, you're never, you can't. No one can see that crystal ball.
Well, if it was as easy as rubber stamping it, then Juno would just be duplicated over and over again. And I think even Ellen Page says, I may not have that kind of success again, where she's just, it's her thing. Diablo Cody has said, I may never have that again. There was just something special about that. The right script, according to Lockhart, really, he talks about, and we could look at Juno, I don't think I make that connection in the book, but he talks about three things: the concept, the execution, and the marketing. And, when Juno came out, what was that, about 12 years ago, the concept was simple, but it was fresh.
And the way it was shot and the performances, everything. Yeah.
Yeah. The execution of it was, oh, wow. The small parts were just great. And the dad, oh my goodness.
JK.
Yeah.
Was it JK, right? Yeah, it was JK. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Just. Yeah, I could just watch those scenes over and over again, and it's a remarkably rewatchable movie. And then the marketing of it. I remember when the trailer first came on, it was the quirkiness of the movie, of the music, the characters, the banter, which, obviously she's well known for now, but it was like, this looks different. There was something just about it. So that would be the, concept, execution, and marketing. That would be the, sometimes we, plot. And it's just like, I always look back at Stand By Me as a good example.
Mm-hmm.
The plot of it is, let's go find a dead body that we heard about.
Right.
But the plot, nobody really cares about the plot. That's not what's driving us. It's that relationship. It's the emotions. That film is another incredible.
It's a masterpiece. No, that's a masterpiece, and it's also Stephen King.
But full of conflict with the leeches and the.
Everything, and the train. Oh, the train. Oh, so good, so good.
There's a theme. There's a theme building there. There's these films that we're throwing out are full of conflict. They're great concepts.
Well, good movies have conflict. Jerry Maguire has conflict, Castaway has conflict. Even good comedies have conflict. Airplane, which is amazing, has, I don't know, is there conflict in Airplane? I mean, there is, but is there conflict in comedy? There should be good conflict. Let's talk about that for a second, because I really do I want to kind of dissect that for a second. Let's pick a great comedy. Hangover obviously has a lot of conflict.
Well, yeah, from the get-go, like the phone, doesn't it start with the phone call?
Yeah, it's like, there's something really, you won't, but they're all beat up, like tooth mitts, like it's all crazy. But
not only are we not we're not going to make the wedding. We don't know where the groom is.
We've lost the groom. He's missing. So, all right. So it's a Hangover is obvious that, but like Airplane, Airplane is, Blazing Saddles. Let's go Blazing Saddles. I mean, conflict. All over the place. The humor is in the conflict in that movie, where something like a slapstick comedy like Airplane, I mean, the conflict is the plane's going down.
Yeah. The
plane. Well, and
if you go to, for those people that want to write for TV shows and streaming, The Office is one of the most amazing shows. Seinfeld. Seinfeld is not a show about nothing. Seinfeld is a show about conflict. It's just really minute conflict, like, George's wallet is too thick. Or
that's the entire episode. That's the entire episode.
It's the brilliance of Seinfeld. Seinfeld is about little, minute conflicts, but we can all relate with that. And I forget who one of the comedies, and it's kind of a classic, is Tootsie.
It's a masterpiece.
You could remove all of the comedy from Tootsie, and it's about an unemployed actor in 2020. Let's say it's a Broadway actor, and Broadway's closed. Now, what are they going to do? Are they doing commercials? Are they doing things that, you could pull all of that out, because the conflict is, that whole opening sequence where Dustin Hoffman is, you're too short, you're too old. Every audition and every actor out there knows that. It's just, there's always something not right. And conflict in comedy. And again, go back to Buster Keaton, go back and watch The General. It's just conflict all the way.
Now, what is the one thing you wish you knew when you first started your journey as a storyteller, filmmaker, screenwriter?
I think it's just, it's art is work. That's a good quote.
That's good.
Yeah. There's a book called Art is Work. And I think it's by the designer who did I Heart New York.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up, as someone who grew up in Florida, this is hard to believe, but I dreamed about going somewhere warm, somewhere where I could wear shorts and flip flops all year long instead of just 10 months out of the year.
That's first world problems, my friend. That is some first world problems right there.
So I discover as a teenager Jimmy Buffett music, just around Come Monday and Margaritaville and that run that he had, and that he's still having to this day, amazingly. But part of his mythology and part of his things was that he's laid back and and I saw an interview where he was on 60 Minutes, and I think it was Ed Bradley was interviewing him, and Buffett was talking about all the things he was doing, which he's continued to do it.
Oh, yeah.
He's one of the most successful entertainers in the history of entertaining. With a net worth, I think around 500 million, something like that. Definitely at the top, in that top little corner of the pyramid there with Oprah and Tyler Perry and Jerry Seinfeld. There's just a few that are up there. But Ed Bradley said, your persona is very laid back, but it seems like you're a workaholic. And Jimmy Buffett's like, yeah, I realized talking, I'm in my 30s at that point. I think the whole thing that we think of about art is that it's going to be, Margaritaville. It's going to be, let's go have some drinks and sit on the beach. And as I study writer after writer after writer, it's amazing how much work goes into it. And Buffett did an amazing job of making it look easy, which is,
the sign of a master.
Aaron's. Yeah, I mean, you look at the output of Aaron Sorkin, it's just stunning. It's just stunning. I mean, how many of those shows in the West Wing did he write? You go back and you look at the early episodes of Twilight Zone, how many Rod Serling wrote. And, it was probably cigarette induced, which eventually killed him, so you don't want to kill yourself. But I think there is a sense of that it's work. And I think it's work for the cinematographer. It's work for the editor. When I made that leap from film editing to all of a sudden video editing, and then all of a sudden this thing called Avid came in. For me, it was 1994. It's like, I got to learn computers now. And then I did 5 years of cutting on an Avid, and then it was jumping over to Final Cut. I did that for 10 years. And then I jumped over to Adobe Premiere, and now I've been flirting with Final Cut X and Blackmagic, so
flirt with the Blackmagic, sir. That's the way to go.
So you realize it's all work. It's nonstop.
It's nonstop. Now
it is the process.
Now I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all my guests. What are 3 screenplays that every screenwriter should read?
I think the 3 screenplays that every screenwriter would be the 3 movies that you love. The movies that you just keep going back to again and again. Obviously, when you look at Tarantino and you read the movies that fascinate him, he's going to give you some drive-in movie that you've never heard of, biker babes in a bar, that's, if you go back and you look at Scorsese, he's going to say these 1930s crime films, that's what he was watching as a kid growing up. That's what he's fascinated in. You watch, you look at his films, how many times has he revisited that theme over and over again of gangsters and whatever. So I would say, Citizen Kane is great, but if you watch that and you go, it just doesn't do it for me, but you're watching, a Marvel movie, or you're watching, whatever, find something you just obsess about that you want to write something like that. For me right now, I'm obsessing about Moneyball. I cannot watch Moneyball enough.
It's great.
I mean, I go back and I read the book and I go, how did they get a screenplay out of this book? I mean, the book by Michael Lewis is brilliant, but you look at that and you know that various writers came in at different points. But I watch that movie over and over again. Why does it work? Why does it doesn't have that traditional, running up the steps and but I mean, as has been pointed out by many people, Rocky doesn't have that incredible ending. He basically loses the fight. He gets the girl, he gets his self-esteem, he's got a different kind of victory. It's I would call that an ironic ending or whatever. So for me, and this is just going to be me, and you find what works for you. I love Moneyball right now. I wish Once Upon a Time in Hollywood would come out in screenplay form. I haven't seen it. I actually saw that movie 9 times in the theater, and I would not call myself a Tarantino fanboy, but I went to that, and I'll tell you, somebody said, why did you see that so many times? I said, well, part of it is I went to LA for the first time in 1981. And so the remnants of 69 Hollywood was still there.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a job. One of my first jobs was with the broadcast equipment rental company. And so I got to go around to all the studios and deliver equipment. So I got to get onto Paramount and Warner. So I feel like I got to see old Hollywood. Actually, I was doing post work at a house once, and John Huston was being rolled in there. And it was the year that he died. And it was just, I feel like I had that bridge to old Hollywood with that film. And I felt like he tapped into that. And so I would love to see that. A film that I can't watch enough is On the Waterfront. Again, there's a book of newspaper articles about the waterfront at that time. I like that Spike Lee, kind of brings that to a contemporary audience from his perspective. So, films like that, that obviously multiple people touched. Arthur Miller actually wrote a version of On the Waterfront, which I haven't read.
That would be amazing to read.
But yeah, I mean, there's just so, when you look at what was going on in the 50s, there's so many layers to it. And I think that's what I love. If there's other screenplays that I would say, Tootsie's a brilliant screenplay, especially for a comedy. It's just, again, so many layers, and there's just so many things that people connect with. I think, if conflict is on one side, I think emotion and catharsis, if you can tap into that, I think the movies that, if you're honest with yourself, the movies that you love and you watch over and over again, there's some emotional heartbeat in there. And so for Moneyball, if you wanted to be a psychologist, you could get into why Moneyball is so fascinating to me. But I think find something that you obsess about, track that screenplay down. I think it's almost a mistake to try to read every screenplay ever written. And because some of those, that's fine to read a lot. But I think obsession is what Tarantino does. I think the best writers, even if you step back from Aaron Sorkin's work, you'll see a common thread. There's similar characters, similar dialogue. Somebody could probably be creative and intercut dialogue set in West Wing and move it to A Social Network, which again is another, maybe the best screenplay in the last 20 years. So I'll go with that. Moneyball, A Social Network, and
On the Waterfront.
And On the Waterfront.
And where can people find the book and find your websites and your blog and all the stuff you do?
You can find me at scottwsmith.com, and that'll kind of spin you off to other places. My blog, if you just Google Screenwriting from Iowa, because I've written like 3,000 posts on that. That'll, that's the bones of the book are in those 3,000 posts that I wrote there. And then I tried to find a way to curate it and rein in that stream. So Screenwriting from Iowa, screenwriterfromiowa.com. But if you just Google it, it'll come up there. Kind of like being on this podcast about 10 years ago, Tom Cruise, the official Tom Cruise blog, gave me a shout out, and I thought, wow, that's kind of cool. What era are we living in that Tom Cruise, or his people at least, are pointing people to my blog? So,
that's cool.
All along the way, you love to get little bits of encouragement here and there. And then the book you can find on Amazon. It's in paperback version. It's in the digital ebook version, and I'm working on the audio version now.
My friend, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a riveting conversation. I really do appreciate not only this conversation, but the book, and I hope it helps more and more screenwriters beat the hell out of their scripts.
Yeah, no, it's been fun. It's my first podcast ever, so I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, thanks again, my friend. Be well.
Thank you.